Will the atheists actually be able to take down the Catholics? Let's find out right now. So, for this run, we'll be using a circular map, and as usual, we're going to split it right down the middle with a massive wall cutting straight through the center. That way both sides are clearly separated. The whole idea here is to make sure things are fair from the start, so we're giving both halves the exact same setup, the prairie biome, nice and balanced, no excuses. Once that's done, we'll head over to the left side where we'll drop in 2 humans, and to give them a bit of a twist, we'll assign them the Catholic religion, just to set them apart with a unique starting point. Then, right after that, we'll move over to the right side of the wall and place another 2 humans. But in this case, we're not giving them any religion at all. They'll stay completely neutral in that regard. With everything set up, we hit play and let the world start developing on its own. Right from the start, you can see the atheists rushing to build their first campfire, trying to create some warmth and a gathering spot. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, the Catholics are already busy putting together their very first tent. A simple shelter, but an essential step for their future plans of expansion. Now that both sides have taken their first steps and laid the foundations for what will eventually become their kingdoms, it's time to customize them a bit more. We'll start with the Catholics, not only giving them a new name so they stand out clearly, but also assigning them a slightly different color. That way we can represent them more clearly on the map, avoid any confusion, and highlight their identity as they grow. And then we've got the atheists. Honestly, I don't think it's even necessary to change their color since they already stand out pretty clearly on the map. Anyway, we've hit an interesting milestone. The first 20 years of this experiment have just passed, and it's here where we start noticing some small differences between the two sides. For example, the Catholics seem to be pulling slightly ahead in terms of population, although to be fair, the gap isn't that big yet. It's still pretty small compared to what you might expect. That said, when we take a closer look at the technological progress, the balance tips a little more. The Catholics have already managed to upgrade several of their houses, reinforcing the foundations with concrete, which not only makes them look sturdier, but also represents a solid step forward in their development. And as if that wasn't enough, they've even built their very first palace for the king, a milestone that definitely marks an important chapter in their history. On the other side, the atheists are also showing progress. Their houses look improved and a bit more organized, though they're clearly not at the same level as the Catholics. In fact, just as I was about to wrap up this first stage, I stopped for a moment after noticing something interesting. The Catholics had finished building their very first mill. And sure, this detail might seem minor at first, but it's probably going to be a game changer, since that mill will almost certainly boost growth and productivity in the decades to come. After that brief event, we reach the very first full century of the experiment, and what we see now is even more telling. Although the Catholics haven't taken over absolutely all of the land within their borders, you could say they already dominate about 90 to 95% of their territory. The atheists, meanwhile, aren't completely falling behind, but their expansion is clearly more limited, covering only around 60% of their land. The difference, however, isn't just about territory. When it comes to development, the Catholics are also ahead. They've managed to build a port, which opens up new possibilities for their kingdom, as well as upgrade some of their secondary palaces, now looking sturdier and more polished. And not only that, they've also built several additional mills. In fact, while looking a bit closer, I noticed that one of these mills is visibly larger than the others, which makes me wonder if it's always been that way, or if it's the result of the trait we assigned at the very beginning. If we keep exploring the rest of the kingdom, we can see that some of the ports have already been upgraded, showing a higher level of detail. Several of the houses, meanwhile, are now fully reinforced with concrete, making them stand out compared to the rest. Interestingly, despite all this development, the capital remains one of the least advanced areas, which is pretty surprising, and even a little contradictory. When it comes to the army, the situation is different. Overall, they're poorly equipped and only have the bare minimum, which, to be fair, was to be expected considering it's only been a century since the start of the simulation. It's still very much a society in the making, and their priorities seem to have been focused more on construction and urban development than on military preparation. As for the atheists, what we see is that there are indeed a few upgraded houses, but honestly, they're pretty scarce compared to the number and quality of the ones the Catholics have. We can also spot some mills up and running, though not too many. And when it comes to the army, things are actually pretty even. You could say they're practically on the same level as the Catholics, at least for now. However, if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture at this exact moment, it's pretty clear that the Catholics are the ones in the lead. Still, it's kind of funny that they haven't built a single church yet, definitely surprising surprising considering the religion they follow. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the coming years, because in the meantime, during the same period we've been observing, the atheists managed to significantly cut down the population gap that the Catholics had at the beginning. When it comes to soldiers though, the difference is still there, and it's a big one, nearly double in favor of the Catholics. By the year 340, the situation had taken quite a sharp turn. At first glance, it looked like everything was the same, but after taking a closer look, we realized the Catholics had once again widened their lead, both in population and military strength. However, zooming in on atheist territory revealed something surprising. The density of their buildings was incredibly high. In a small region located in the south of their land, there was a massive concentration of structures, including a significant number of mines and a few markets. But without a doubt, the most striking detail was just how many mines were clustered in that specific area. On top of that, there were numerous training barracks spread throughout the kingdom, though most of them were concentrated in the south. What's curious though is that this massive effort still wasn't showing up in their army, at least not in terms of equipment quality. The northern region also had several mines, but compared to the south, it seemed like a less developed area overall. As for the Catholics, there hadn't been many technological advances since the last time we checked in on them. They had built a few barracks, but for example, there were no functioning mines, and there was still a lot of empty space they hadn't taken advantage of. The most striking detail of all was that even after more than 3 centuries, they still hadn't built a single church, which is pretty surprising considering their religious identity. By the year 600, however, the situation changed drastically. The atheists managed to surpass the Catholics in population, and on top of that, gained a considerable lead in the size of their military. Taking a broad look at their territory, the reason was obvious. The density of their housing was far greater than that of the Catholics, which explained their rapid population growth. Finally, at this point, the Catholics decided to build churches, as well as raise a few industrial buildings and even some constructions with a more modern style. The atheists, for their part, kept an extremely high density of houses in the southern part of their territory, and they also started standing out for the huge number of statues they were putting up. I'm not really sure what was behind that obsession, but the sheer amount of statues they built was pretty impressive. As for their army, just as expected, it was already fully equipped with shotguns and firearms in general, same as the Catholics, so in that regard, both kingdoms were pretty evenly matched. And so, with not much else left to analyze at this stage, the decisive moment finally arrived. We tore down the wall dividing the kingdoms and kicked off the great showdown. Right after hitting play, the atheists launched the first attack against the Catholics, but the Catholics wasted no time striking back, moving in with what looked like much more powerful weapons, capable of taking out several enemies with a single shot. The difference in firepower was so overwhelming that they quickly conquered the northern region. The atheists tried to hold their ground, did everything they could to repel the invasion, but it just wasn't enough. Not long after, they also lost the south and ended up giving up control of the north once again. In just a short span of time, the Catholics kept expanding, taking more and more territory until the atheists were left with almost no soldiers, confined to nothing more than a thin coastal strip that didn't take long to fall completely into Catholic hands. I'm not exaggerating when I say this was the fastest war I've ever seen in WorldBox, maybe 2 or 3 years tops. The Catholics steamrolled through almost without taking any meaningful losses, neither in their army nor among their civilians. To make things even worse for the atheists, most of their buildings were left completely intact, which is only going to let the Catholics grow even faster in the future. And honestly, I'm not sure what the exact reason was behind the Catholics being so much stronger than the atheists. Maybe, after all, it's because they had God on their side.